Ethan had lived in the same quiet suburb for nearly 7 years. To most, he was just the soft-spoken man who fixed things. Leaky pipes, broken toasters, jammed door locks. His small repair business kept the neighborhood functioning. What few people knew was that he possessed an IQ of 160, though he never talked about it. He didn't need to. He preferred people underestimate him. His days revolved around his 6-year-old daughter, Lily, who was the center of his world. She was bright, curious, and the only person who could make him laugh out loud. Her presence had kept him afloat since the day his wife, Jenna, died in a car accident 4 years earlier. Since then, Ethan's genius had quietly retreated from the world. Their small home was filled with puzzles, books, and scattered chess pieces. Lily loved bedtime riddles more than fairy tales, and Ethan would invent them every night. He'd watch her brows knit in concentration before she'd beam with pride after solving them. There was a quiet pride in him too, not just as a father, but as someone who was shaping a mind, perhaps the only mind he cared to shape anymore. He didn't miss the world of academia or high-stakes labs. It was noisy, ambitious, lonely. This life, though simple, had meaning. But his mind never stopped working. Every problem he encountered, no matter how mundane, triggered layers of thought. He saw patterns in the way birds migrated, in the cracks on sidewalks, in the tempo of Lily's laugh. While eating dinner, he'd sometimes pause mid-bite, eyes unfocused, caught in a storm of calculation or theory he wasn't even aware had begun forming. It wasn't something he flaunted. In fact, he almost feared it. Because every time he truly used his mind, it pulled him deeper into places he tried to leave behind. One night, after Lily had gone to bed, Ethan sat alone with his tea and turned on the TV. The news played a segment on a cold case from 10 years ago. It was short, just a few minutes, about a renewed FBI effort to solve a string of abductions involving children. No suspects. No clear motive. Only cryptic symbols left behind at each scene. He should have changed the channel, but something about those markings triggered something deep inside him. He leaned forward, rewinding the clip. The screen flashed through the symbols again, odd spirals, numbers, an unfamiliar arrangement of dots and lines. His tea went cold. He stared, blinked, replayed the footage 5 more times. Then, without a word, he stood up, went to his closet, pulled out an old notebook, and began scribbling. What started as curiosity quickly became something else. The patterns felt familiar, not in content, but in structure. They carried the rhythm of encryption, a fingerprint of design that no random criminal would likely produce. Ethan hadn't looked at a cipher in years, but his mind dove back into the language of codes as if it had never stopped. By midnight, diagrams covered the kitchen table. The symbols weren't gibberish. They were mathematically structured, rooted in prime numbers and Fibonacci sequences. Noticing a Fibonacci pattern between the dates and locations of the kidnappings, he started creating a map, connecting red pins with black threads like some movie cliché, but it wasn't theatrics. It was logic visualized. And it was pointing towards something deeply intentional. He didn't sleep. The next morning, Lily woke to the smell of waffles and the sight of her dad's tired but smiling face. He'd hidden all the papers before she came into the room, not wanting her to see the storm beneath the surface. She asked for her usual puzzle while eating, and he gave her a riddle about mirrors and shadows, pretending like nothing had changed. But inside, something had. Ethan spent the next 2 days immersed in research. He didn't tell anyone. Not even his closest neighbor, an old man who played chess with him on Sundays. The more Ethan unraveled, the more convinced he became that the FBI had missed something big. He wasn't just looking at symbols, he was reading a blueprint. A strategy. Maybe even a confession, hidden in plain sight. By the end of the 3rd day, he had created a document, 24 pages long. Charts, connections, translations, predictive models. He added no name. No signature. He sent it anonymously to the FBI tip line through a secure connection. Not because he wanted to be involved, but because if he didn't share it, he knew he'd never forgive himself. Then, for a moment, he tried to forget. He took Lily to the park, pushed her on the swing, laughed as she squealed with joy. But as they walked home, he noticed a black SUV parked half a block from his house. Windows tinted. Engine idle. Ethan said nothing. Just squeezed Lily's hand a little tighter. Ethan didn't sleep much that night. The presence of the black SUV gnawed at him. He tried brushing it off as coincidence, but that was a lie he couldn't convince himself to believe. His instincts, sharpened by years of calculation and silent observation, told him it was watching. The tip he had sent anonymously was never meant to ripple this far or this fast. He wasn't looking for attention, only resolution. Yet he had disturbed something that didn't want to be touched. The next morning, he noticed subtle shifts. A drone overhead that lingered longer than expected. A strange interference in his phone's signal. A neighbor asking odd questions about his background. Someone was already checking into him. He returned home, pulled out his notes, and reread every detail, this time not as a theorist, but as someone preparing for scrutiny. He had found patterns in the case that weren't guesses or coincidences. They were hard-coded into the fabric of the crimes. The original kidnappings spanned nearly 4 states over a decade. Every victim disappeared within a 21-day interval. He had cross-referenced satellite imagery, school schedules, and even weather patterns. That wasn't overkill, it was necessary. The deeper he went, the clearer it became. The person behind it had structured the crimes like a sequence of algorithms. Purposeful gaps. Repeating numbers. A layered design. The symbols at each scene weren't merely decorative, they were anchors to specific ideas, each drawn from ancient languages or mathematical concepts. Some reflected elements of the golden ratio. Others hinted at astronomical cycles. Ethan realized the Unsolved wasn't simply intelligent, they were fluent in hidden logic. And that logic hadn't ended with the last kidnapping. It was still active. After plotting the last known location, he overlaid it with projected timelines and caught a disturbing alignment. If the sequence continued, a new event was due, within the next 2 weeks. The location was narrowing to a specific 30-mile corridor. Time and probability weren't on his side, but the numbers were too sharp to dismiss. He couldn't involve himself publicly. Doing so would expose Lily. So, he created a second document, this time focusing solely on the projections and time frames. No fluff. Just evidence and interpretation. Again, he sent it anonymously. Within 36 hours, there was movement. 3 vehicles parked near the same location he had predicted. News outlets reported an FBI sweep, though details were scarce. That's when he knew. His work hadn't just been read, it had been acted on. That should have given him relief, but it didn't. Instead, it pulled him further in. Because now the stakes had changed. He wasn't just solving an old puzzle. He was actively interfering in something that was still unfolding. He revisited every clue, every piece of data. This time, he focused on the anomalies, instances where the pattern faltered or slightly deviated. That's where he found it, a tiny detail overlooked in the 5th case. The symbol at that scene had an extra mark. One the reports had dismissed as accidental. But it wasn't. It shifted the entire cipher and, in turn, revealed a secondary layer, a cipher within a cipher. Embedded in it were coordinates and a date. 9 days from now. A location nestled deep in Pennsylvania. He stared at the numbers, heart pounding. This wasn't a clue, it was a countdown. The Unsolved had embedded their next move years ago, trusting that no one would ever crack it. But now Ethan had. He didn't want the credit. He didn't care for acknowledgement. All he wanted was to stop it from happening again. Still, he had a problem. Sending this next wave of insight anonymously wouldn't work. If the FBI had any sense, they were already trying to trace him. And if they weren't, it meant they didn't fully believe him. Either way, time was thinning. He printed everything out. Clean copies. No scribbles. No assumptions. Just data and logic. He included a note this time. I don't want involvement. I don't want recognition. But if you ignore this, someone will disappear again. Soon. He used a new drop location. A different encryption method. And when he returned home, he cleared all traces. He didn't want Lily exposed to any of this. He didn't want his past, or his mind, to interfere with her world. But that evening, as he put her to bed and turned off the light, his phone buzzed once. A single message. No number. No signature. Just 4 words. "We need to talk." He stood frozen for a long moment, staring at the screen. Then he powered off the device, sat down at the table, and waited. The knock came precisely at 9 a.m. Ethan opened the door slowly, keeping his expression neutral. The woman standing outside wore a gray suit, no badge visible, posture controlled. Her gaze was sharp, calculating, not the kind that searched for answers, but one that measured threats. She introduced herself with only a first name, Callahan. No agency mentioned. No formalities. Just a thin envelope extended toward him. He didn't take it. She said the document had been flagged at the highest level, that its projections were eerily accurate. She didn't accuse him of anything. She didn't have to. Her questions implied doubt masked his interest. Why this case? Why now? Where had he learned the cipher method? Ethan answered calmly, never defensive, never evasive. He told her he observed, analyzed, and made logical extensions. Nothing more. She tested him with fabricated data points, and he corrected her within seconds, exposing her bluff without arrogance. Her expression didn't change, but her posture shifted slightly. He noticed. She sat at his table, uninvited, and slid out a series of files. Victim photos. Location reports. Crime scene sketches. Ethan reviewed them quickly. Nothing shocked him, he'd seen them already. What stood out were the details that weren't public. This was a test. She wanted to see what he noticed beyond the obvious. He pointed to inconsistencies, whether conditions misaligned with witness testimony, timestamp errors in footage logs, minor symbol shifts that hadn't been categorized. She remained silent as he laid them out with dispassionate clarity. Finally, she asked the real question: how far was he willing to go? Ethan didn't answer immediately. He thought about Lily upstairs, about the world he'd built carefully to protect her from the chaos he knew too well. He said he wouldn't testify, wouldn't go public, and wouldn't allow anyone near his daughter. But if his mind could stop the next incident, he'd cooperate, on his terms. Callahan studied him for a moment longer. Then, she slid across a thin folder. Inside was a file labeled internal use only. Not FBI. Not local law enforcement. A symbol Ethan recognized. Private Task Force. Unofficial. No records. It meant she wasn't just following orders. She was building something of her own, off the books. He knew the risks but also understood the value of working without interference. She told him the Bureau had ignored her for too long. His theories proved what she'd suspected. This was bigger than a random string of crimes. She needed results. She didn't need bureaucracy. And most of all, she needed something the Bureau couldn't offer her, someone who saw what others missed. She offered him a position, not as a consultant, not officially, but as her personal analyst. No names. No records. Just raw intelligence feeding into her fieldwork. Ethan agreed, with a single condition: his identity remained sealed. Over the next few hours, she shared elements of the case even the inner circle hadn't seen. There were redacted correspondences between departments, surveillance footage mysteriously corrupted, internal memos suggesting someone had manipulated evidence from within. Ethan absorbed every detail, eyes flicking across pages like a machine. He didn't speculate. He formed equations, outlined timelines, and noted behavioral anomalies that pointed not just to a killer, but a planner. Someone deeply embedded in a system meant to stop them. She tested him again, this time handing over encrypted data intercepted months ago, thought unreadable. Ethan asked for silence and began decoding. Within 30 minutes he produced partial text. A mix of philosophical quotes, random medical terms, and what appeared to be coordinates. It was a signature. Not literal, but symbolic. The Unsolved wasn't just avoiding detection, they were challenging those chasing them. It wasn't about evading law enforcement. It was a game played on a different level, one where ego and intellect mattered more than motive or method. Callahan nodded, expression unreadable. Ethan knew she understood the weight of what he had found. This wasn't just a criminal case. It was a war of minds. One that required someone who could think like the enemy, not follow procedural checklists. She didn't say thank you. She simply stood, left a burner phone on the table, and told him to expect encrypted messages only. Their connection would not be spoken of again. As she left, Ethan watched her pause at the curb, speaking briefly into a device, then vanishing into the black SUV he'd seen before. He didn't feel triumphant. There was no satisfaction. Just the sobering realization that he was now part of something far larger than he ever intended to join. His mind, long dormant to the world's complexities, had just been turned into a weapon. And in the hands of Agent Callahan, it was already aimed. The first data packet came encrypted with a shifting cipher Ethan hadn't seen before. It took him 4 minutes to break. Inside were transcripts from interrogation reports, partial psychological profiles, redacted surveillance logs, and a single image, an aerial shot of a field in upstate New York with a timestamp only 3 days old. He immediately noticed tire tracks forming a mirrored spiral, identical in shape to a symbol from one of the early crime scenes. It wasn't residue from a crime. It was a message. He responded through the protocol Callahan established, silent, indirect, using a custom-built channel they both maintained. No words, only codes embedded in datasets that mimicked routine communications. He didn't need her to confirm receipt. The next data dump came faster. Victimology patterns, metadata strings, cell tower triangulations. The killer had resurfaced. And they were escalating. Ethan's job wasn't to chase. It was to anticipate. He created a probability grid using 6 behavioral indicators pulled from past movements. The projections showed 3 likely targets within a week. He focused on the most consistent variables: proximity to historical sites, low police presence, symbolic dates. That led to a small township in Virginia, where a local festival coincided with the birthday of one of the previous victims. Coincidence didn't exist here. He flagged it. Callahan deployed a field team without notifying her supervisors. 2 days later, a missing girl was recovered from an underground well on the edge of the festival grounds. She was cold, dehydrated, but alive. The local authorities thought it was luck. The FBI credited Callahan's instincts. She gave no explanations. No one asked further. But the success brought danger. The killer adjusted. Next drop came without a symbol. No patterns. No signatures. The move was deliberate. Ethan realized they were being watched. The Unsolved had detected their interference. This was no longer analysis. It was chess. Ethan switched strategies. He reverse-engineered the killer's methodology, focusing on what they omitted instead of what they left behind. Silence became data. Gaps became outlines. Then something changed. In the latest data set Callahan forwarded, Ethan noticed a line of communication between internal FBI systems and an external node that shouldn't exist. A relay, bouncing through secure servers, disguised as mundane traffic. On the surface, it looked like automated backups. But the timestamps matched every major breakthrough Callahan had shared with him. Someone was leaking. Ethan ran a silent trace, comparing access logs and transmission bursts. The anomaly always triggered 37 minutes after Callahan sent a report to her superior. It wasn't just oversight. It was orchestration. Someone on the inside was feeding the Unsolved information. A mole. He compiled the pattern, filtered out noise, and cross-referenced it with employee activity logs. One name appeared in all the right places at all the wrong times. A mid-level intelligence coordinator who had rotated through cybercrime, behavioral profiling, and logistics, all departments tied to the case. Ethan didn't share the name directly. He sent a modified set of logs to Callahan, with only the essential discrepancies marked. She responded within hours with a voice message, short, shaken, furious. He told her to wait before confronting anyone. The mole wasn't careless. He was embedded deep enough to deflect suspicion. Exposing him too early could shut down access completely. Ethan suggested bait. A fabricated lead pointing toward an impossible location, coded in a style only the Unsolved would recognize. If the mole forwarded it, they'd act on it. All Callahan had to do was watch who responded. She executed the plan exactly. The next morning, one of the internal agents submitted a request to check the fake location. Surveillance footage caught him accessing the very data Ethan had embedded with false markers. That night, he was detained under internal security protocols. Ethan didn't hear what happened next, but he didn't need to. A few days later, the tone of their communication shifted. No pleasantries, no updates, just data. Urgent, chaotic, raw. The Unsub had gone silent. No drops. No movement. Nothing. Ethan knew this wasn't retreat. It was recalibration. The killer had lost their inside man. That meant their next move would be reckless, unfiltered, and likely final. Ethan returned to his original analysis and found what he had missed. There was one date unaccounted for, one symbolic marker still unresolved, an eclipse occurring in 6 days, directly over a rural town in Pennsylvania. He built a fresh model using that point as the core. Everything aligned, the geometry of previous crimes, the mythology behind the killer's patterns, the last unsolved cipher. He sent one final file. No projections. Just coordinates, a time, and a short note. He will be there. This ends now. They arrived before dawn, silent and precise, hidden beneath the cover of a passing eclipse that cast strange shadows across the town. Callahan coordinated quietly from an off-grid command post, using only encrypted comms and a map drawn from Ethan's final coordinates. No press. No local law enforcement. Every move was clean, surgical, built entirely on the intelligence of a man the Bureau still officially didn't know existed. Ethan watched everything unfold from his living room, laptop open, eyes fixed on the live telemetry Callahan had allowed him limited access to. There were no feeds, no faces, just signals, readings, movement logs. That was all he needed. At 11:37 a.m., a sensor picked up a fluctuation near the site he marked, a long-abandoned farmhouse on the edge of the eclipse's path. One operative moved in to investigate. Seconds later, communication with him cut out. Callahan issued a silent code to proceed. Within minutes, the structure was surrounded. The air inside was wired with crude traps, tripwires, pressure plates, optical triggers, none of them designed to kill, only to delay. Psychological warfare. The Unsub was inside, and he wanted to be found. Ethan had predicted this. He'd warned that the killer's final move wouldn't be escape, it would be control. This wasn't about running. It was about legacy. A finale. Inside the structure, they found writing covering every wall. Not blood, not threats, formulas, sequences, phrases from philosophers, all arranged like an intricate language. At the center, a chair. Empty. On the floor beside it, a device linked to a wireless transmitter, rigged to activate a digital payload. It wasn't physical destruction, it was data. Files ready to release if tampered with. Files that could expose names, locations, operational details the killer had collected over years. Everything pointed to one message: he was watching too. But Ethan had accounted for this. Before sending his final note, he had embedded a recursive loop in the killer's own signal structure. A ghost protocol designed to replicate and replace any outgoing transmission with dead data. It had been running in the background unnoticed. The payload was intercepted before activation, neutralized silently, without alerting the Unsub. Callahan moved in personally. Down a hidden tunnel behind the farmhouse, she found him, calm, seated, hands on his knees. He offered no resistance. No speech. Just a single smirk, as if he had expected her all along. He wasn't surprised. That unnerved her more than anything. His name wasn't released. His face never shown. Quietly, the case was marked as classified. Success not disclosed. Closure not offered. Callahan's report made no mention of Ethan. Her official narrative cited anonymous signals intelligence. The team accepted it without question. Promotions followed. She declined hers. Back in his home, Ethan shut down his system. Wiped every file. Burned every physical note. He didn't want legacy. He didn't want credit. He only wanted to close the book and return to the world he valued, the quiet one, where Lily asked him to tie her shoelaces and tell her bedtime puzzles. But something in him had changed. Not louder. Not darker. Just sharper. More aware. He received one envelope by mail weeks later. No return address. Inside was a small card with 4 words, asterisk. Some enemies require shadows. Asterisk below that, a chess piece, white king, tipped over. He understood. There would be no further contact. The world resumed. He walked Lily to school. Fixed neighbors' leaky faucets. Taught her new riddles at dinner. But his mind, once reawakened, remained watchful. Not paranoid. Not obsessive. Just prepared. One evening, Lily asked him why the moon sometimes disappears. He looked up at the darkening sky and thought about patterns, silence, and timing. He told her. Because sometimes, even light needs to rest. Far away, in a digital archive sealed under layers of clearance, a folder remains labeled. Null operative, ghost protocol. No real name. No physical evidence. Just data points, projections, and one signature embedded in a code block few can read, a single equation with his birth year hidden inside the variables. A nod, not a confession. And in a field outside Pennsylvania, now long overgrown, nothing remains but a faint impression in the soil, shaped like a spiral. A mark not of crime, but of conclusion. Ethan never spoke of the case again. But some nights, as he plays chess with Lily, he looks at the board not as a game, but a map. And in his silence, there's not secrecy. Only peace, earned not through recognition, but through precision.